If you picture medieval people going to the toilet, you probably picture a castle wall, a wooden seat, and a very unlucky person walking underneath. That did happen, but the real story is stranger. Medieval sanitation was not one grand disaster. It was a class system, an engineering problem, and occasionally a weapon. Start in a castle. Those little stone projections hanging off the outer walls, some were garderobes, toilets built into chambers where a hole dropped waste down a vertical shaft. In the best case, it landed in a pit. In the less best case, it landed in a moat, a ditch, or somewhere gravity had been asked to solve a social problem. The arrangement sounds barbaric, but it had logic. Castles needed defenses, and putting the toilet shaft against an outside wall kept the smell and waste away from living rooms, kitchens, and ideally, the people eating dinner. Medieval architecture was many things, but it did understand that soup and sewage should not share a corridor. Some garderobes emptied directly into running water. Others had cesspits that needed emptying. And that raises an awkward question. Who emptied them? Professional waste workers did. In medieval English towns, they were sometimes called Gong farmers. They worked at night, hauling sludge from privies and cesspits because daytime was apparently reserved for slightly more glamorous professions. It was dangerous, filthy work. Waste pits could contain toxic gases, and people did sometimes die after entering them. The medieval world had no shortage of terrible jobs, but this one had the added insult of being performed in darkness. Outside castles, most people did not have stone plumbing. In towns, a household might have a backyard privy, essentially a small wooden structure over a pit. Bigger houses and monasteries could have more elaborate systems, with channels carrying water and waste away. Monasteries, which housed large communities living under strict routines, had a practical reason to take this seriously. If dozens of people share a building, sanitation stops being a private inconvenience and becomes a management crisis. Cities tried to control the problem too. They passed rules against dumping waste into streets, alleys, and rivers near drinking water sources, which tells you two things at once. First, people knew waste was dangerous and disgusting. Second, enough people were dumping it there anyway that the rules had to exist. Medieval streets were not uniformly rivers of filth, despite the popular image. Many towns had drains, designated dumping places, public latrines, scavengers, and local regulations. But sanitation depended on money, space, water, enforcement, and whether your neighbor was the kind of person who saw a nearby stream as a public resource or a convenient disappearing act. And then there were public toilets. In some medieval cities, communal latrines were built over bridges or rivers, using flowing water to carry waste away. London had public privies on London Bridge, convenient in the narrow technical sense. If the bridge was crowded, though, the experience probably had all the privacy of making a life decision in a train station. The famous castle toilet, meanwhile, had another peculiar feature. It was not always safe. A garderobe shaft was literally an opening through the castle wall. Attackers occasionally tried to climb through them. It is difficult to imagine a more committed burglary strategy. Yet castles also had guards, narrow passages, and defensive designs precisely because a toilet hole could become an unexpected weak point. But the biggest danger was not usually an invader climbing out of the waste pit. It was contamination. People did not know about bacteria the way we do. They did not understand germs as invisible organisms, moving from feces to hands, food, water, and another person's intestines, with the grim efficiency of a tiny courier service. But they had experience. They knew foul water could make people sick. They knew bad smells and rotting matter were associated with disease. Their explanations were often built around miasma, the idea that poisonous air caused illness. But their practical instincts sometimes pointed in useful directions. Move waste away, use flowing water, avoid obviously contaminated places. The trouble was that cities grew faster than their sanitation systems. Wells, cesspits, animals, crowded homes, workshops, markets, and rivers all occupied the same dense urban space. A cesspit could leak into groundwater. Waste could reach a river used downstream for drinking or washing. And once that happened, the city had built a very efficient machine for sharing intestinal diseases with people it had never met. So, how did people go to the toilet in medieval times? Not in one way. A wealthy noble might use a stone garderobe. A monk might use a communal latrine connected to a drainage channel. A town household might use a backyard privy. A poor urban resident might rely on shared facilities, open ground, or whatever arrangement was available. Rural families often had more space, which solved some problems and created others less dramatically. The surprising part is that medieval people were not indifferent to cleanliness. They washed, used latrines, removed waste, built drains, and made rules. They were trying to manage a problem every city still has: too many bodies, too little space, and a substance nobody wants nearby, but everybody produces. The difference is that we hide the whole operation behind porcelain, pipes, and one little handle. Medieval people had to look the problem in the face, sometimes from a castle wall.